Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha. I'm a reporter and analyst for Buha's Block, and welcome to another episode. On today's show, we're going to be discussing 5 big questions for the Lakers this offseason. Most of these questions lead to more questions, and that's part of this exercise here, is just talking this out, setting the stage and setting the stakes for the offseason. Let's get into it. Question number 1 is, what are the Lakers trying to build? And I'm taking a macro view with this question because the Lakers can go in a variety of ways with their team building and roster building strategy here. Do they want to mimic the 2024 Dallas Mavericks build around Luka Doncic, and the focus is going to be finding a better rim running center or more 3-and-D wings, more athleticism, more defense? Do they go that route? Do they view themselves as contenders needing some tweaking with the roster? And it's like, hey, if we had Luka available with the way that LeBron was playing, with the way that Austin was starting to play in that OKC series, maybe we can push OKC or San Antonio and we can be a conference finals threat. And we're right there as the third best team in the West. We just need maybe an upgrade at one of the starting spots, maybe a couple of new bench pieces, and we are right there. Do they feel like they need a drastic overhaul and it's Luka and Austin and nothing else, or Luka, Austin, LeBron, nothing else, maybe even just Luka and nothing else, and entire new cast of characters? There are so many ways the Lakers can attack trying to improve this roster, trying to address several needs, that this to me is like the big thing here. And I don't think we got clarity at the exit interviews with Rob Pelinka and JJ Redick in terms of some of the player traits, characteristics, some of the things they want. They want more youth, more defense, more athleticism, but we didn't get clarity as to, is that big change to the roster? Like, how do they feel about some of their free agents? The only guy that Rob Pelinka spoke glowingly about in terms of returning was Austin Reaves. So I think there's a lot of open-ended questions with LeBron and what he wants, his future. But you also have Rui and Marcus and Luke Kennard and Jackson Hayes, and what happens with DeAndre Ayton and his $8 million player option. So I feel like this question naturally leads to more questions, and we could go down the rabbit hole. But I'm just curious to know, like, how close do the Lakers feel they are? Because all of the questions I have from this point on, to some degree, stem from this big picture question. I think they will try to keep Austin, they will try to keep LeBron, and they'll try to keep parts of their supporting cast, and then also upgrade it. I think that middle pathway is maybe the most likely, but if they just run it back, that is a big vote of confidence for the current group and saying that they felt like they were closer than it might have looked in that second round series. Or if they overhaul it, obviously that shows to some degree they did not feel like they were that close. And maybe there's some pressure either from the new ownership with Mark Walter or with Luka and his contract extension situation looming. There's just a lot that we don't know. There is a lot of pressure. There is a lot on this summer for LA to nail it and to have a big summer. And I think one of the key things is going to be finding pieces that fit with Luka long term, because aside from Austin Reaves and maybe Rui, you could argue that the Lakers don't have a long-term piece next to Luka in terms of guys that will be here in 3 years, 5 years, and maybe with the way the roster turnover happens, there's no guarantee that even those guys are still here in 3 to 5 years. But in general, like, if we're looking at guys that can be on the 2030 Lakers, outside of Austin and Rui, I don't know that there's another player on this roster that will be there. Maybe a Adu Thero, but like, you look at Marcus, Luke, DA, Jackson, I don't think these guys are going to be a part of the long-term future. So for as great as last offseason was from a value perspective, with LA getting DA and Marcus and Jake and those guys all living up to their contracts, or I think in the case of DeAndre and Marcus outperforming their contracts, like, those guys are not long-term pieces. So LA tried to add a long-term piece with the Mark Williams trade, which ended up being rescinded. But like, this summer, I think it's not only improving the roster, it's not only showing us how close they felt like they were and how they want to try to approach taking down OKC or San Antonio over the next few years. It's also, can you find pieces that fit long term? That to me should be a big priority for the Lakers, but they're at a crossroads here because you rarely are in a situation where you're a 50 plus win, a team that got out of the first round, having $50+ million in cap space potentially. This to me is like the most fascinating thing because there's so many ways the Lakers can take it in terms of being very aggressive and making some really big moves, being more patient or passive and making some smaller moves, or some pathways in the middle of that where there is a mix of aggression and patience. And I'm just really interested to see how the Lakers navigate all this. Question number 2 is, will the Lakers and LeBron find common ground? And I've been talking about this for months. Like, what is the maximum the Lakers are willing to offer LeBron? Where's that number? I don't think it's at 50 million. I don't think it's at 40 million. I think it's somewhere below that. But then what is the minimum LeBron is willing to accept from the Lakers? I think one of the keys with the Lakers and LeBron negotiating is that it's actually a negotiation. And so, for example, if you are applying for a job and the job has a listing of a salary, going into that job interview that is the salary. Maybe there's a little bit of room for negotiation, but if you are applying for that job, going into that situation that whatever that number is, that is the number for the job if you end up getting it. Whereas other jobs that don't have, maybe have a range of salaries, or the job is up for negotiation, that can get a little bit more contentious. Emotions and ego and pride and respect are all on the line when you're having a job negotiation. So that's where I think the Lakers are actually at a bit of a disadvantage here, because whether it's Cleveland or Golden State or New York or wherever, they have their set. We could offer you the minimum. We could offer you the non-taxpayer MLE. We could offer you the room exception, whatever it ends up being for the team. That it's a very simple situation. It's just, hey, LeBron, we want you. We want you to have X role. We would love to have you in our system, but we can only offer you this. Here's the offer. With the Lakers, it's far more complicated because you're actually having a negotiation. You're actually saying, hey, LeBron, like, yes, you were an all-star this year. You helped us win a first-round series. You stepped up as the number one after Luka and Austin went out. You produced at, like, our analytics models say you produced at a $35 million level, or a 40 or a 45, whatever that number ends up being. But we need you to take 20 million so we can retain Rui and add someone else, or retain Marcus and add someone else. And like that becomes, despite that being more than what the other teams can offer, for example, if it's 20 million, it does add in an element of, we could have given you more, but we chose not to, where the other teams are giving the absolute maximum that they can give. And it's hard to quantify how that factors into a negotiation and how that factors into feelings and emotion and respect and all that. And so I think the Lakers in some ways are actually kind of hurt by being able to make a real offer for LeBron and negotiate despite it being higher. Because if you're LeBron and you're like, hey, I produced at a $40 million level, pay me what I'm worth, pay me what I produced at, and they say, no, we want to pay you half of that, like that does become a little tricky. So this to me is the big thing with these two. There's also the matter of how long does LeBron actually want to take to decide on his basketball future, in terms of whether he wants to play next season, whether he wants to play in LA, whether he wants to play elsewhere, how much he's willing to play for next season. He had the recent comment on the Mind the Game podcast where he talked about late June, July, maybe into August. And I don't think he's going to take that long, because he'd be putting himself in a position where he's almost certainly going to be getting a vet minimum, whether it's from the Lakers or someone else. He's well within his right. If anyone deserves to take a vacation, take some time off, and ponder their future, it's LeBron James, after playing 23 years and doing as much for the game as he's done. But the downside to that is obviously for the Lakers, like it puts you in a position where you potentially have to rescind his rights and proceed with the offseason as if he's gone. The other factor here for me is, would LeBron accept that discount if it meant improving the roster? So if you go back to that 2024 offseason when LeBron was considering taking a pay cut to allow the Lakers to use that non-taxpayer MLE on either Klay Thompson or James Harden, DeMar DeRozan, Jonas Valanciunas. I said at the time on here that I only felt 2 of those 4 were realistic. DeMar DeRozan and James Harden were never going to sign for the non-taxpayer MLE. It was only Klay Thompson or Jonas Valanciunas. Klay ended up going to Dallas. Jonas Valanciunas ended up going to Washington. The Lakers tried to make competitive offers for both of them. They actually, depending on who you talk to, made a bigger offer than Dallas did for Klay Thompson, and he still chose to go to Dallas. But is LeBron in a similar headspace? Would he take 20, 25, 15 million, whatever that number ends up being, to allow the Lakers to make an offer for a Walker Kessler, a Peyton Watson, a Jalen Duren, a Tara Eason, or to trade for a Lou Dort or a Jalen Suggs or someone like that? Is he willing to do that? Or is he in the headspace of, I want to play one more year, I want my retirement tour, and I want the money that I'm worth. I want the value that I'm providing. That's a question that is still undetermined. And then the final thing is, along those lines, and looking back at his Mind the Game podcast, he talked about the Lakers not having the requisite talent, and not that it was not that they were out coached by OKC. They were not out hustled by OKC. They were not out physicaled by OKC. It was actually talent. They were out talented by OKC. And that was a not so veiled shot at the front office, at the organization. And he's taken those before over the last few years in terms of talking about the roster and the Lakers' lack of talent and the lack of firepower relative to the other top teams in the league. So there's the matter of like what type of contract he wants and what the Lakers are willing to offer. There's a matter of, is he willing to take a pay cut for that? And whether he is or not, like what would constitute him wanting to return? What is the level that he wants the roster to get to where he feels like, okay, I want to be here. I want to be a part of this. But I think this is the second biggest question for the Lakers outside of their direction, outside of their identity, like who they want to be. I think LeBron is the biggest question because of that $59 million cap hold and what that's going to do for their cap space. And if LeBron opts out, that's a lot of money off the books, and that allows the Lakers to operate with cap space. If they rescind his rights, that allows them to operate with cap space. Or if he signs immediately, then they know, okay, LeBron's on the books at this number and we have X amount of cap space to play with for Rui, Marcus, Luke, and any other potential free agents or trade targets. So all these things are going to factor into what happens with LeBron, what happens with his next contract, and then ultimately for the Lakers, how much flexibility they have with their cap space. Question number 3 is just how untouchable is Austin Reaves. Austin has been close to untouchable for years. I've talked about this before. I've reported this at The Athletic. I've reported this on here, that the Lakers for years rejected offers, whether it was Kyrie Irving, DeJounte Murray, Trae Young, Zach LaVine. They rejected offers for all-star level guards, most of those guys, clutch guys, that would have required Austin Reaves being sent out in the deal. So they have refused to trade him for other players that on paper at the time were better than Austin for the most part, right? I think at some point, the DeJounte was kind of close at that point, but Kyrie, Trae Young, Zach LaVine, like these guys on paper were better than Austin at the time, and the Lakers refused to trade him. And now they're in a position where they're going to be tested again of how much do you think Austin is worth? Is this a no-brainer max? Is there some form of negotiation here? Is some other team going to offer him the max and you want to outbid them and you say, hey, maybe some team, I think the most someone could offer him is about 4 years, 178. You say, hey, we'll offer you 5 years, 200. And so you're getting more guaranteed money. You're getting an extra year. The average annual value is lower than that, but we want to keep you and we want to give you overall more money than anyone else can pay you, plus an extra year of security. But like this summer, we've heard it for years in terms of the Lakers, like how they view Austin, how much they love Austin. They have not wanted to trade Austin. They kept him out of the Luka trade. But I bring up whether he's untouchable for 2 reasons. One, like, are they willing to outbid whatever offer comes in for Austin? If it is a max from Brooklyn, if it's a max from Chicago, if Detroit ends up pivoting and creating cap space and making a competitive offer, I think Memphis could also get involved. The Clippers have some cap space, depending on what they do with some of their moves. So like if some of these teams come calling for Austin and make a max offer or a near max offer, are the Lakers willing to play ball, outbid, outspend those teams and give him a max or near max contract? Like that is the ultimate test of how untouchable Austin is for them, right? Like we cannot lose this guy by any means necessary, and we're going to pay him the absolute most or outbid anybody regardless of what that number gets to. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is if the Lakers get involved in the Giannis sweepstakes, or if another star becomes available that is a player that's clearly better than Austin, that the Lakers feel like might fit better next to Luka long term, are they willing to put Austin on the table in a potential sign and trade? And of course, Austin has the final say because he's an unrestricted free agent, and a sign and trade requires him to sign off on any deal and sign off on being traded to that team. But assuming that the Lakers or that team is willing to pay him more than the market and he can get the most money out of that situation, like maybe he is on board with that, right? Or maybe you combine these 2 points and it's like, hey, we're going to trade for Giannis or we're going to trade for player, star X, whatever. And we need you to take a little bit of a discount. And if you're not willing to take a discount, we're going to have to go in a different direction. And we can't pay you the max. We can't pay you near the max. We can't pay you above X amount of money because we want to fit in this new star and we want to slot you as number 3 and we want to have some flexibility to retain our free agents or to sign guys with cap space, whatever the case may be for the Lakers in that situation. Like, I just think this offseason is going to be the great truth serum as to how the Lakers truly view Austin. Is it as a potential number 2? Is it as a max or near max player? And is it potentially in lieu of pursuing greener pastures, pursuing other superstars? I think losing Austin for nothing would be a disaster for LA and would really impact their ability to compete. I don't think you're replacing Austin on the current free agent market or even with the projected guys out there via trade. So unless they are signing trading him elsewhere and getting him in a position that he wants to be in with another team, losing Austin for nothing would be a big blow for the Lakers. So I think they're going to do everything they can to prioritize keeping him and to keep him at whatever number that costs. It's just a really big decision that is going to heavily sway how we view the Lakers offseason. Question number 4 is, how aggressive are the Lakers willing to be? And this is building off of the identity, the big picture of like, what do they want this roster to look like? And it's also building off of LeBron and Austin, because depending on what happens with LeBron, depending on what happens with Austin, that will determine how much cap space they have, how much flexibility they have, and what this group looks like. But putting those 2 players aside here, there's still the matter of how do they view Rui Hachimura? How do they view Marcus Smart, Luke Kennard, Jackson Hayes, DeAndre Ayton? Then lower in the roster hierarchy, Jake LaRavia, Dalton Knecht, Jared Vanderbilt. Do they try to dump any of those guys? Adu Thero? Do they potentially use him as an asset in a trade? Or do they view him as a guy they really want to develop and they want to try to keep out of trades? There's Bronny and his partial guarantee with this contract. There's Nick Smith Jr. and his team option. Outside of LeBron and Austin, the Lakers have a slew of decisions to make with the rest of the roster and which player archetypes and contracts they are going to prioritize and which ones they are okay with potentially losing or trying to get off of. Then there's the what do they feel like their needs are, right? Are they looking for a center? Are they looking for a wing? Are they looking for both? Are they willing to put draft capital on the table? Are they willing to trade all 3 of their first round picks? I think if Giannis becomes available and Giannis is a real possibility for them, sure, they would put the 3 picks on the table. But outside of that, are there scenarios in which they are willing to put the picks? Are you willing to sign and trade for a Walker Kessler or a Peyton Watson or a Jalen Duren? Are you willing to put picks on the table for a Lou Dort or an Isaiah Hartenstein or to pry another starting level player away from a different situation? So I think how aggressive LA is, like this does relate to some degree to question number 1, but question number 1 is more philosophical. It is more of an offseason overview. This is actually putting action on the table here of we are willing to part with a future first. We are willing to part with a couple of future firsts. We're willing to part with this year's first. And that's a whole other subplot within this is like, do they keep the number 25 pick? What type of player do they want with the number 25 pick? Do they want more of a project, more of a guy who can develop and be part of the team for the foreseeable future? Or are they looking for more of a win now, ready to contribute player? Are they looking for a center? Are they looking for a 2-way wing? Like what type of positional archetype do they want within this? Are they willing to attach that pick to get off of Jared Vanderbilt's contract, for example? How does the new CBA factor into all this? Because the Lakers have to be very judicious with their spending and with their assets and how they manage all of this. So if the Lakers keep LeBron and Austin, I think at that point they have to consider everybody else is expendable to some degree. The other part of this is like how much pressure is on the Lakers to improve the roster this summer? And are they taking a potentially longer term view in terms of we're going to try to add as much as we can this summer. We're going to try to add at the 2027 deadline. And then we're going to try to fully form the roster by the 2027 offseason, go into the 2027-28 season as bona fide contenders, ideally built up a roster on par with OKC or San Antonio. I think it's going to be really difficult to build a roster with the requisite top level talent and depth to compete with OKC and San Antonio or be viewed on their same level just this summer. So is LA like going all in, pushing all their chips to the middle of the table and saying, we're emptying the clip. We are doing everything we can to improve this roster, maximize this roster in like the most win now way possible this summer going into next year? Or is it a little bit of a slower build or even a medium build? And it's like, hey, we're going to add one big piece or maybe a couple pieces, and then we're going to try to add a piece at the deadline, try to add more pieces next summer and view it as a multi-transaction cycle build. The Lakers often have taken a patient and passive approach over the last few off seasons, especially post Russell Westbrook trade. They have been a bit more cautious, a bit more conservative. And now again, they're at this crossroads where they have to determine how aggressive they actually want to be. And this is what I think ultimately, like aside from LeBron potentially leaving or Austin potentially leaving, will determine if LA's offseason is a success. So this is a huge question. And then the fifth and final question, I'm going to bring it full circle and bring it back to the big picture. What does Luka want? And what I mean by that is one of the few things we did get insight into at the exit interviews was Rob Pelinka talked about retrofitting the roster around Luka Doncic and trying to maximize the roster around him specifically and his style of play, his game. We've heard this right after the Lakers acquired Luka. We heard this at last season's exit interviews going into the summer. We heard it at the media day. Like, this has been the Lakers' primary talking point. This has been their North Star since acquiring Luka. They did the Mark Williams trade, ended up rescinding it due to his medicals. They added a couple of guys in DeAndre Ayton and Marcus Smart that Luka recruited. They went out and got Luka's guys, so to speak, and also retained Jackson Hayes, another one of Luka's guys who shares an agent with him. Lakers obviously kept Maxi Kleber as well. There's going to be some pressure on the Lakers to deliver whatever Luka wants with this roster in terms of the roster build, the types of players. Rob Pelinka has spoken multiple times about the ongoing dialogue with Luka and just checking in with him and getting his input on roster decisions and not necessarily making roster decisions based on what he says, but at least giving him that input, that seat at the table to have a say with regards to what the Lakers do. But the question here with Luka is like, how does he feel about LA's timeline? Is he all in on next season? Does he view it as, if we have a multi-transactional approach, we can build an even better roster going into a couple years from now? How does he feel about the center position? How does he feel about the 3-and-D wings and the perimeter guys? Like, he's got a great relationship with Austin. He's got a great relationship with Rui. He recruited Marcus. Is he on board with all three of those guys being back next year? And is he on board with the Lakers essentially running it back with a lot of last year's guys and then just maybe making a couple smaller tweaks? This is the guy that the Lakers are going to be building around for the next 5 years. And how does he feel about this? How much pressure is he willing to exert? How much is he willing to force the Lakers' hand into improving the roster? Or does he take like some guys like to exert the pressure, some guys don't? And maybe Luka takes a step back and is like, hey, I would love, player X or position archetype X. And like, I think these are the needs that I would love for you guys to address, but I'm not really going to force your hand here. Luka strikes me as a guy who's not going to operate that way, but he also can't be thrilled with losing in round 1 last year, losing in round 2 this year, and OKC and San Antonio looking as dominant as they are. So is he going to actively recruit this offseason? And how does he view the immediacy, the urgency with his prime? Because he's in his prime. He's 27. Luka just made first team All-NBA. He's made it 6 times in his first 8 seasons. One of only 10 players in NBA history to do that. He is in his prime. Like, all-time greats typically peak around 27 to 29. Luka is just beginning that stretch with the Lakers. And so how does he view this? How does he feel about all this? Of note, Luka has 3 more years left on his contract with the Lakers, but he can't opt out after the 2027-28 season. And that summer, he would be eligible for a 5-year, $417 million contract. So there's a lot at stake here in terms of how Luka feels about the direction of the franchise, how Luka feels about the roster, how competitive the roster is, and how they fare next season. They had progress, winning more games and going further in the playoffs, but Luka's trying to win a championship. And so, can they put together a conference finals run? Can they put together a finals run? Can they win a championship next season? These are all questions that we don't have the answers to, but I think LA is going to have to address those topics with Luka and gauge how he feels about all that. And so, in summation, I think the big 5 questions for the Lakers are: what are they trying to build? Will they find common ground with LeBron? Just how untouchable is Austin Reaves? How aggressive are the Lakers willing to be this summer? And what does Luka want? I believe each one of those questions is intertwined and related to some degree. And those are the big 5 questions for me. And so I really wanted to just set the stage, set the stakes for this summer. And moving forward, we'll be diving into elements of each of these questions. But appreciate you guys for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. Those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back later in the week. I'll talk to you then.